Panel we're trying out this year called Cartoon Crash Course. This is an idea I've had for a while. This will be a panel where we discuss the importance of cartoons, the history of cartoons, our experience with them. This will necessarily be a panel that tackles nostalgia, because, say it with me now, what do we all watch when we're kids that helped form our attachments to things and probably introduced us to the fandom? Cartoons, yes, thank you. I am gonna give you guys a chance to participate here now and then. So let's start this one off pretty vaguely. So we can't really start a convention like this without talking about the big D in the room, and of course that is, say it with me, the one company that controls it all, the mouse with all the power. Disney, that's right. So I'm curious, you guys, what was your first Disney film that you saw, and how did it affect you? What was the first one that you saw that really sticks in your mind, that's always stayed in the back?
I'd have to say Sleeping Beauty.
Oh, well that's unusual.
Yeah, I watched a lot of old Disney when I was little. That's what I was most exposed to.
Okay.
And I had a couple of years where I was into this huge princess phase. And nowadays I'm kind of getting into the Lolita style, which kind of like ties into a big princessy style thing.
Okay.
So it's impacted my opinions on fashion and such like that.
Well, that's interesting.
The way I dress myself. Yeah.
So that's kind of funny, because the first one that's always kind of stuck with me was actually the first one, which I saw when I was very, very young, Snow White. It was made in 1937, and it was actually a gigantic risk for the company because it was the nation was just pulling itself out of a massive depression. Disney was still very much a fledgling company. It was one of the most expensive films ever produced at the time. If it was the first animated film ever produced in color, in full, lush, detailed animation. And if it had flopped, that company would never have recovered. But thankfully, it not only was a huge success, it became such a massive hit that it was renewed for the theaters over and over and over again. And it helped popularize Disney as a company, not only that could produce kind of the modern fairy tale, but it introduced Disney as a company to something that's a bit seedier part of the company's history, which was working with the federal government, specifically making war films. There's a lot of stuff that Disney doesn't really like to talk about anymore. Yes, well,
Snafu was Warner Brothers.
Well, yeah, that's right. Yes, Snafu was Warner Brothers. Warner Brothers was making something called Merry Melodies and Looney Tunes at the time, which were very successful.
Yeah, that was Warner Brothers, and it was the people that did. It was Dr. Seuss. Dr. Seuss that helped write a lot of the Snafu, along with Chris Freeling.
Oh, that's right. Two guys were really responsible for that. Chuck Jones and
Chris Freeling and
Chris Freeling.
and whatever Dr. Seuss's real name was. Those were the three that were behind Snafu.
Yep, they did create Snafu, and so Disney as a company was very wide, very varied. They had a lot of different productions going on at the time. And for me, getting back to Snow White, the reason that one's always stuck with me is A, the lush animation, and B, the fact that it kind of follows the same formula that most of Grimm's fairy tales does, in that it's not afraid to scare the shit out of you from time to time. I mean, there's some really intense, scary imagery in that film for a movie that was released in 1937. And if you look at it from a historical perspective, you might think, wow, they really allowed to get away with this? But at the time, it was probably allowed to go. It was allowed to go into the theater because the Depression itself was the company was mired in such a huge economic depression at the time that they were seeking some kind of cathartic release. And that is one of the reasons we do go to the movies, and we do tend to stick with cartoons, is because they form our memories of childhood. Let me get back to my notes here real quick. Well, Specifically, one of the things I wanted to talk about with Disney is its ties to the fandom, because obviously it's informed a lot of our first exposure to what we thought of as anthropomorphic characters. For me, it was, of course, Disney's Robin Hood, the 1978 version with Maid Marian and actually physically copied Baloo the Bear. They actually literally told in order to save on the animation process, supposedly, they actually had the animators trace over existing footage from from the Jungle Book, which was released a few years prior. And the animators were so put off by this because the heads of Disney were saying, "Dad, you don't need to draw new animation. Just trace over the old stuff. I mean, it's already there. It already exists. Just go frame by frame and redo it." And the animators said, "No, you don't understand how this works. That's actually more work, and it's more complicated, and you're wasting more money by making us do that." And Robin Hood, for me, was one of the films that kind of introduced me to the idea that these animals could walk and talk and be like people. And it was also one of the things that got me into Arthurian legend in a way, because I thought, well, who is this Prince John? Who is this? And I'm blanking. Of course, I'm blanking on the name.
King Richard.
Yeah, King Richard. It got me to do a little bit of historical digging, because even back then I was interested in history, not just the history of animation, but history in general, world history. So what are some of the films that you guys saw that helped inform your opinions or some of your early exposure to the furry fandom?
Okay. I was sure telling me you're talking to.
In the front with the scarf.
Zootopia?
Okay, yeah, I was expecting that one, Zootopia.
Okay, first movie I remember seeing, 101 Dalmatians, when they released it back in the years before they put it on VHS for the first time, but TLK, always TLK.
Oh, okay, yeah. The Disney Renaissance is one I expected to come up quite a lot. I think we all saw quite a bit of those. I know the first film that I ever saw in theaters from Disney was The Lion King. And we actually, my family had to take me out early because when Mufasa died, I couldn't stop crying. In the back with the cat ears.
Yes.
Yes.
Sorry. The Secret of Nim.
Ooh. Oh, that's a favorite of mine. Oh, that actually lets me talk about one of my favorite animators of all time, Don Bluth, who used to work at Disney. And that ties into, one of the what you call kind of a slumping period for the company was the 70s and the 80s. You saw them hit a lot of highs in the 30s, 40s, and 50s when they were just coming out of producing a bunch of war pictures for the federal government. They had all this money, they had all this talent, that had just finished producing fully animated short films, and they were eager to try them on different stories. Now, of course, the first fully animated movie they did after they were freed from the shackles of working on war pictures was, of course, Cinderella, which is really just Snow White with a fresh coat of paint. I mean, let's be honest, it's got the same central story, it's got the same central setup. It's all about a princess yearning for more, stuck in a terrible situation. She must overcome a terrible antagonist to find a way to Prince Charming. And then, as the company moved on and some of their animators, some of the well-trained animators became fed up with the system, guys like Don Bluth split off to fund his own filmation company, which produced things like The Secret of Nim, like All Dogs Go to Heaven. That's one that I always remember.
LBT. Land Before Time.
Oh yes, God, I just finished rewatching that one, The Land Before Time. But one that I always liked, and I'm curious if any of you guys hold this in high regard, as high regard as I do. How many of you guys here have seen The Black Cauldron? Oh, really? Only a couple of you guys. How many of you have never heard of it? Okay, so the Black Cauldron was a movie that Disney made. It's one of their stories. It's commonly called the movie that almost broke Disney as a company, because it took them 12 years to produce this film, and it cost them somewhere in the neighborhood of about $40 million. And that's equivalent to about 120 or 130 million in today's budget. So it was ridiculously expensive. It was also one of the most beautifully animated films that Disney had produced since making some of its great classics like Fantasia, which, despite being really fondly remembered, was not much of a financial success when it first released. And The Black Cauldron became really problematic for Disney because, number one, it was based off of a very popular series of children's books. And they were already running into the problem of, well, we're just going to option this series of 7 novels and condense it down into one story. And these books are already still really popular. So lots of people have read the source material. You're already going to kind of rankle them by taking a lesser villain, the Horned King, who is this demonic skeletal figure, wants to raise an army of the dead. And here's my co-host, Iggy.
Hi!
Hello!
I'm fashionably late.
That's okay. I was also a little late too. You just joined me in time to talk about the Black Cauldron.
What's the Black Cauldron?
Oh God. Well, I was just telling these people that it was the film that almost killed Disney.
Oh, I've heard of this. Yes.
Yeah. So it took them several years to produce, and it was such a financial drain that it nearly broke the back of the company. But I would encourage you guys, if you have any interest in this story at all, or any interest in the history of animation and how difficult a process it can be, especially when you're dealing with the bureaucracy behind it. There's a gentleman who's on YouTube named Red Sword, who's done 2 fantastic breakdowns of Disney's lesser-known animated films. One of them is Treasure Planet, which I also like because it's one of the few unique adaptations of that story, and it's a movie that Disney also put out to get it killed because they didn't want to work on things like that anymore. And the other is the Black Cauldron, it was so over the top that when it was screened for test audiences, there's a scene in the movie where the Horned King, he wants to get this device called the Black Cauldron so he can raise a literal army of the dead. So he's bringing back skeletonized zombies to fight for him. And it was filmed and animated in such lavish, gory, disgusting detail that children in the screening audience ran out screaming in terror.
You mean like they do when they saw the Oogie Loves?
Or the Dark Crystal.
Yeah. I like the Dark Crystal.
Yeah, I love the Dark Crystal too.
So happy. I went to a garage sale one day.
It's on Netflix now. Dark Crystal, it's on Netflix now.
I pay for Netflix and I don't get to watch it. I have younger siblings that just use all the logins and all the bandwidth.
Well, that's a malfunction. That's what happens when you have to show your nice things. So it was so terrifying that they had to cut 12 minutes. Now, this is the part of the story that, yeah, not only that, but they only had a single completed test screening of the film. This was it. This is the only prototype they had. And the new head of the company, Jeffrey Kurtzman, walked into the editing booth and proceeded to cut it himself.
Oh, that's like asking James Woods to make Videodrome even worse.
Yes. So the reason this is such a travesty is because when you cut an animated film, you don't go in and cut the actual finished product. You go in and storyboard out scene by scene what parts you want to cut out so that you can preserve continuity and make sure that the film makes sense. But the new head of the animation department, who had never ever worked in animation before, he came from a marketing background. He had absolutely no idea how, he was so unfamiliar with Disney that he said, wow, how many people, he said something to the effect of, I can't believe I'm working for the same company that once animated Droopy Dog, which was made by Warner Brothers. So this is how far out of his element this man is. And this is the guy who runs into the editing booth and starts cutting your film. The only way they got him to stop was to go to the CEO, Bob Iger, to get him to go in there and say, dude, you gotta cut this out. And I've seen some of the saved footage, and if they had left that stuff in, it would have made The Black Cauldron the first R-rated movie Disney ever released. It was that graphic and terrifying.
Wow.
If I remember correctly, if I may, that it scared the crap out of people who had to, like the children who had to watch it to test it or something.
You just said they ran out of it basically like,
it was
very...
I think, what scene was it?
Children, I think, essentially were expecting a Bambi-esque, like, typically an animated thing is going to be a G or at worst a PG, but in that era, it's pretty much G for animated films, right? I can't think of one that immediately, that's meant at least for children at some level.
Yeah, most of the time, well, you're also getting into the sticky territory of film rating, which is, Jaws is rated PG.
Well, you have to look at it in the era as well. The
yeah,
era is
yeah.
interesting. 'Cause, I mean, the whole NC-17 and all that other like I think Aladdin is actually PG.
Yeah, I think so.
Like Disney played for a long time. Disney always for their successful movies always wanted a G rating. Right? Wasn't that a huge thing? Because otherwise, parents wouldn't take their kids to
Yes.
yeah.
I mean, so but you're right. The thing that makes the Black Cauldron so interesting is that it's essentially a very grim and gritty, dark fantasy movie that's not very. It's not very marketing friendly. It's not very toddler friendly. It's something that is going to challenge younger kids and show them kind of disturbing stuff. Now we're going to stop talking about the Cauldron because I can go on about that for probably an hour. And we have other stuff we wanted to talk
While
about.
you're figuring out your next topic, everyone want to see Rocco's Modern Life in the episode with the new Wacky Deli?
It's been a while since
Wacky Deli. Well, there's basically editing room disasters, and that's all I was thinking about when you're talking
Oh
about
God!
the editing
Okay,
room.
I know which one you're talking about.
Basically, people that don't know what they're doing, the characters of the show are made to ruin someone's. Basically, the guy has The Simpsons. He tries to ruin the television show by he has to make a pilot for the next big hit, and the main characters have to figure that out. And basically, all of the creative wars and disasters that happen behind the scenes. So they end up producing this terrible product. Like one of the episodes, just all overexposed film. All of it is cut terribly and awful, and it's a great hit success. Unless you're Disney, you almost went bankrupt. So he's trying to bankrupt the show, and he can't. And I just thought of like a flip book where you took out half the things, because that's basically what. If you don't know what Wacky Deli is, you need to go check out what Wacky Deli is. And that's what Disney tried. That's what Disney tried to push on an audience to pay for.
Yeah, well, never let it be said that Disney doesn't know best.
Did they ever put the unreleased footage back onto DVD when they re-released it at all, or no?
To my knowledge, no. The
Don't
only
think so. You'd have
the
to
only thing
fish.
the only thing you can find is some unreleased, unfinished test footage that was never. Like I said, what they were working with was a rough prototype cut of the film that just had some rough color inserted in. Some of the animation, the in-betweens weren't finished. It was still slightly prototypey and wonky, but it was good enough to show to an audience. But unfortunately, that film is just that footage has just been lost. I want to talk about something that some of you guys may be a little familiar with. The big programming blocks. Let's get on there about Saturday morning cartoons and Toonami. How many of you guys show of hands? How many of you are familiar with Toonami? Okay,
I couldn't watch the Super Friends because they put Toonami on over at Cartoon Network.
Really?
Yes. All the shows I like got preempted by Hamtaro and Toonami. I'm not a Toonami hater, but it's like, I really wanted to watch, like, Droopy the Dog and, like, really old stuff, and that wasn't hip anymore. So now we're getting all hipster, aren't we?
No, a little bit hipster. What do you want to talk about, Iggy?
No, let's talk about Toonami. Go for it.
Oh, I mean, the thing that really impresses me, and the reason I wanted to bring
It's
up
really
Toonami
important
specifically.
historically.
Oh yeah, it's super important, especially for historically and for me as a person, because Toonami came in at a time in the early '90s when the Japanese animation scene was still struggling to gain mainstream acceptance in America.
Yeah.
And
My first experience with anime was probably Toonami many, many years ago.
Me too. Yeah, it was. And my first anime was that I can remember with any clarity is the big one, Dragon Ball Z, the one that almost everybody saw growing up. At least in my era, if you had cable TV and you were going to local public school and you weren't able to watch DBZ and talk about what was eventually dubbed screen porn, because. And that name sounds a little risque, but when you go back and watch it as an adult, you realize, oh wow, this show has a massive pacing problem where the characters will just literally stand around and scream and power up their attack.
The entire episode is,
Yeah.
he really did! I want to guess the thing! Yeah! That's like the whole episode.
Yeah.
And then they're on the island again.
Yeah.
And someone's got a ball somewhere.
Reusing footage and
Oh yes, it's all. They would show them powering up, and it's like the same montage up and back. Like,
it's like they show the same mountain just crumbling into dust in the background, and then they show it again 2 minutes later, just reverse the shot, but they forgot to color correct the smoke.
yeah.
So it looks like the light's going the wrong
And they
way.
put a filter over it. Oh, the volcano erupted. Now the background is more red.
Oh God, it's not. Oh, it's okay. It's for American TV. No one will ever notice. Quick, we just hired Bruce Falconer to give it a classy American rock score. which actually still holds up to this day.
I got an unpopular opinion about animes. It's a really unpopular opinion. Like, I've been to anime cons, and I'm told by people that are someone really into anime that someone tell me I'm wrong. Have you seen Cowboy Bebop?
Oh God, yes.
Cowboy Bebop. It's an older anime from mid '90s or whatever, late '90s.
Yeah.
So I believe it was originally in Japanese, like most, but the English dub. People apparently, if I talk to people that are really into anime, they tell me the English dub is terrible, absolutely terrible.
What?
I think it's amazing.
I
Who
agree.
are
I
you
think
even
it's
talking
great.
to? The only
Look, there's some people that are like in it, like if you're not watching it with either subtitles or just in Japanese, it's no good for you. And I'm like, that's the show that got me into anime. Like, I can't do the 500 episodes of Charging Powers, but the story that can be told in like 20 to 30 episodes, I'm in.
Yeah.
I'm sold.
Not only that, but the thing about Cowboy Bebop, and I'm sorry if we're going to go on a little tangent here, guys, because kind of the big brother to the afternoon programming block of Toonami is, of course, Adult Swim.
Yeah, they had the late night, kind of before Adult Swim got big, they started putting Toonami on later and later and later because, of course, through time and what was exposed to American audiences became, I want to say anime is not always necessarily adult, but the themes got darker, there's more just dark things happening and murder.
Sailor Moon.
Sailor Moon preempted the Super Friends.
That's the one that I first saw.
I mean, looking back, it's a really well done show for what it is. I wasn't huge into anime then, but looking back, I know that there's one person I know that's just hugely into that show still, and I think it's awesome. It's just one I didn't it's like Mega Man for me. Like, I didn't grow up with Mega Man, but I grew up with like Super Mario Brothers, so it's amazing. But like looking back, like, Mega Man's really good at what it did. Sorry, I'm totally tangenting.
Oh, dude, that's fine. Well, this is gonna go exactly like Tipsy Time Machine. We have stuff prepared, but then we get up here and we start talking.
I don't remember Tipsy Time Machine. Who was here Thursday? Oh, just a few. So there's a panel called Mistake, and it's known as if you've heard of Mystery Science Theater 3000. While you're finding where we're going here, but we raised a bunch of money for charity while having a bunch of drinking rules for charity, and a lot of drinking happened.
Yes.
Your panel was before that. I don't remember anything that happened Thursday.
Yes.
I was told the panel went really well.
Was it? It went really well because it was basically you, me, and Dragor just sitting up here bullshitting for about an hour. And
Was it? There was probably historical context to it. That apparently was what the panel was.
Yeah.
Someone told me about Bill Clinton and Cruising USA. So
And we made was it Harriet Tubman and who's the lady who's
what's the next topic of this panel?
Oh God. The next topic of this panel is, well, guys, I want to talk about cartoons as extensions of other media. And this is specifically, we've had some really bad cartoon spin-offs from theatrical films, and we've also had some really, really good ones. For example, the one I always go to is from the 1980s. It's called The Real Ghostbusters. It's often considered better than most of the other stuff that come out of the Ghostbusters franchise, specifically because it's very creative, it's very colorful, it sticks to the comedy, it mixes the right blend of comedy and horror together that the original movie did, that its sequels and follow-ups never quite managed to reach. The other one that always comes to mind for me is probably, let's see, well, it was also released during a time period in the 80s where cartoons became less about entertaining children and more about selling a product. And I know you were really excited to talk about this, Iggy, is cartoons as capitalism. And we'll try not to go.
There's so many
hard
places
on
we
this.
can go. I mean, Power Rangers are great. There's a lot. I have merchandise still in the basement from the Power Rangers. Remember Spin Fighters?
Oh yeah.
I have the stadium, the arena, and the soccer field, which was still the stadium, but it had cooler nets.
God, I've still got all of the action figures that I collected as a kid from the 1990s Fox Kids version of Spider-Man and the original airing of the X-Men cartoons, which were, for me, like, the first times I was exposed to all those characters. But the stuff I always go to as pure marketing fodder are shows like He-Man and Transformers
of course.
and G.I. Joe.
Even, yeah, G.I. Joe especially.
G.I. Joe especially. I mean, that was all the way back into the 60s.
Yeah.
And it was this really kind of interesting era where cartoons became less about expressing themselves as animated properties and forms of a new artistic media, and more about, these kids are sitting in front of the TV eating their cereal away from their parents. How can we make them want to buy some shit?
They learned the dirty little secret. The easiest way to an adult's wallet is through the children. I've seen this.
In the back.
But panelists, why did this happen in the 80s?
I was just about to get
Go
there.
for it.
You can thank a little man named Ronald Reagan, who used to be an actor and somehow became the president of the United States. He approved a bill in Congress that rescinded the restrictions on how much advertising could be aired during certain programming hours on TV. Specifically, television programming blocks where children were more likely to be watching. The media, with the powers that be, for a few decades, were very concerned about companies using this emerging form of entertainment called television to negatively affect and preach their products to children. But Reagan, in his infinite wisdom, did away with all that and allowed companies to create what was basically, in a lot of respects, 30-minute television commercials for toys. A lot of the shows were created specifically to sell a line of toys. You came up with the toys first, and then you created the show around it. That's how the show, He-Man specifically, came about.
Really?
Yeah, they wanted to compete with something with the other toy makers at the time. I think it was specifically, was it Mattel?
Fisher Price.
It was Fisher Price or
Hasbro, Fisher Price. I'm trying to think of the name. I can't remember it.
I can't remember the name of the company who was creating the Star Wars toys at the time.
Kenner.
Kenner, yeah.
Kenner.
Yeah, they wanted to compete with Kenner, and of course, Kenner's figures were about yay big. And so you could fit them in your pocket, you could take them around and travel with them. But Mattel said, you know what? No, we're going to make something that's massive. They took an actual Mattel figure and they basically molded clay around it to make it as big and beefy and muscular as they could, because they wanted this thing to be about 8 to 9 inches tall and about 5 to 6 inches wide. They wanted this thing to be big and beefy. They wanted the kids playing with it to feel like they were actually warriors smashing together these pieces of plastic. And so they designed the characters to be exciting toys first. And there's even a story about when they designed the first Castle playset for the He-Man action figures, they had to redesign the mouth of the cave because the original production work was focused on the fact that the toys, the castle had to look symmetrical. It had to have the fangs coming down. The original drawbridge would open up, and there's fangs that come down in the mouth of the opening entrance to the castle. And when the show was put into production, they said, no, you can't have that, because otherwise the kids are going to have to turn their toys sideways to stick them into the castle. They won't be able to make them actually walk right out. And the artist behind that said, screw you, I'm not changing my design. And they said, oh yes you are. And he never forgave them for that, because they messed with it. They took a chopping block to the symmetry of his design to make it more toy friendly. I can't believe some of the things that they did to make these shows more marketable. Like, everybody remembers Transformers for being this groundbreaking TV show that's all about warring factions from beyond the stars. They come to Earth to fight for the future of humanity. But really, if you look back at the majority of the episodes, a lot of that animation is really bad.
It's basically chopped up.
It's like you can tell a lot of the stuff
cut out
really went to
it's
the
a
cheap.
flip book missing a third of the pages. There's a truck in now. It's standing. No, it's Megazord.
It's also a cartoon that could only be made in the 80s. Our main character has a giant scope on his arm. What does he do? He transforms into a gun. we can sell this to children. It'll be totally okay.
Wouldn't Beetlejuice be the crossover between both because it was a movie first, then animation and toys as well?
I'm sorry, could you repeat
Yeah,
that?
Beetlejuice.
Beetlejuice.
Ooh,
Beetlejuice is an interesting
The
story.
movie, the TV show, and the
Really?
What did you think of the Beetlejuice cartoon?
Uh,
I didn't mind it, but it's kind of different than the movie. But I mean, is it so? What does anyone have an opinion on the Beetlejuice movie? Sorry, the Beetlejuice cartoon show. It was all right, but it was nothing. It was nowhere near as good as the movie, right?
I mean,
But the movie's also really good. But they certainly sold so many things. There's a Beetlejuice NES game. There's a Beetlejuice PC game. There's all kinds of figures that I believe they were trying to show post the movie more for the television show.
I mean, as far as the Beetlejuice cartoon goes, I actually remember that a lot more. I have more concrete memories of the TV show than I ever did of the movie, because I think
Really?
I think I saw the television show way before I ever.
Really?
Yes.
Same. Okay.
I mean, it was one of those things where because it was a weird. I mean, if you go back,
It
and
was
watch-
very different. There's some dark
Yeah.
things in it, if I remember, and there's some plot lines that require, like, even if you're selling a lot of stuff, like Transformers has pretty simple plot lines.
Yeah.
Beetlejuice had more complicated plot lines, I believe. As long correct me if I'm wrong on anything, because I'm remembering things slowly from all of the. Well, that's gone. So those things.
Well, I don't have very concrete memories of Beetlejuice. Sorry, the film. But as far as the TV show goes, the thing that always struck me about it was that it's almost like kind of a prototype for something that's super surreal, like Adventure Time.
Yeah.
Because it's almost like, you know, the film is very dark and it has this really macabre, like
There's a
almost-
macabre and there's
almost
surrealistic
like-
stuff in it.
Yeah.
There's a sandworm and other things. I don't remember the movie. I haven't seen it.
Yeah, that's
So it's been a while, but I have spoiler rules.
And you know, and it's all done with this, you know, weird kind of off-putting claymation that's very it's got a very unique, very Tim Burton feel to it.
Yes, it does.
When
Tim Burton, oh my
yeah,
goodness.
and when you take that and turn it into a 2D animated cartoon, it's almost frees it up
When
in a
the
way.
creativity's there, you can use the medium of cartoon to do just about anything. Like it's a clay where in a movie, the amount of money you have to do to make one effect for one scene that might be 30 seconds, it might be the primary thing you remember from the movie. But a cartoon show, I mean, Saturday morning cartoons for how long those ran, I mean, you have to have a, you know, was it 26 episodes or whatever? Like there's 2 seasons generally.
Yeah.
But you have to come up with like 30 some odd episodes per year. And that's what, 30 minutes? Well, 20 commercials, whatever, 20 minutes. You come up with about 10 to 11, 12 hours of actual content that's animated. And that's a lot of work compared to 90 minutes of movie. Yeah, you might record 900 minutes of footage, but I mean, a lot of magic can happen with just a few editors once you've filmed the effects.
Yeah.
You can do a lot with the medium of cartoons. I mean, we're not going to get into all this other stuff, like political cartoons and all this other stuff, but you can mold the medium in so many different ways, cheaply, but still do a really good job of it, because art is the thing. But movies, effects cost a ton of money, especially back in the day.
Yeah.
And Beetlejuice, what, early, I was in 92 or something?
Yeah, it was early 90s. I mean, I remember watching that show specifically when I was probably 6 or 7 years old, and that would have been around 95, 96, somewhere around there. I mean, it was during that long period where Cartoon Network would show nothing. They used to have these marathons where they would show Beetlejuice all day.
Oh, yeah.
Or they would show Swat Kats all
Yeah,
day.
it'd be like a Monday through Friday thing. They'd
Yeah.
pick one and be like from 9 to 4 until Toonami.
Yeah. Or it was specifically like they would do it on a weekend. They would
That
have-
too?
Yeah, they would have nothing but a long repeating programming block of different cartoons. And one of the ones that a cartoon that's always stuck with me personally, and I know I'd honestly like to hear your thoughts about this, Iggy, because I was surprised to learn that you didn't know a whole lot about one of the golden measuring sticks for all of animated history, at least for where most of the internet is concerned. Batman, the animated series.
Well, I was going to say, with Tim Burton involved, that's a huge piece of going from the marketing stuff. So I did some priming. I watched some things I haven't seen. I'm sure I've seen it before.
Yeah.
There's a lot of cartoons I grew up with, so I don't sit around and watch cartoons all the time anymore, because unfortunately I'm a really important programmer, not really. So Batman the Animated Series is a really cool story.
Yeah.
And it's one of those times where in the early 90s we have all these sort of the late 80s and all these law changes and stuff, and PBS has to show commercials and all of this, and there's a lot of competition. There's certain shows that sort of break the mold, and when you get this combination of the artists, the voice artists, all the people behind the scenes, it's really hard to make all of that work together in this awesome unison and have people with the money that can just shut the whole thing down like that. I mean, the fact that Tim Burton had success with the Batman films is what makes Batman the Animated Series work, as well as all these creative people behind the scenes that essentially, as far as I recall, so they're basically given this product to do something with, and they took some ideas and they basically said, you know what? We're going to try to create the best product we possibly can. It's going to be film noir-y. It's going to be a lot different than the other stuff that's out there, and we want to create something that's truly special. They went for it, they shot for the moon, and they actually hit it.
Yeah, and it's something that's, the reason it's so well remembered and so well regarded is because, as you said, they shot for the moon and they actually hit it. That's happened so incredibly rarely, especially with animation. I mean, there's something to be said for Batman because if a show hits you on an emotional level, if that's the first way you're ever exposed to that character, you know, an actor's performance of a character on screen brings them to life in a way that almost a comic book or a book or a film never will or never can compare to. For a lot of people, Kevin Conroy, who voiced Batman in Batman the Animated Series, he is Batman.
What about the Joker? The Joker is
yeah.
literally the titular thing where Mark Hamill is the Joker for everyone. These characters, these actors are so iconic. Their performances are so deeply ingrained in the popular culture. They have been playing the same characters by WB's request in multiple different forms of media, in video games, in rides, in movies, in cartoons, in some cases lending their voices to live action commercials and segments, because their voices and their performance are singularly associated with how people see that character. I mean, I'm the Joker by McDonald.
Yeah, it's such a weird thing to think of too, because you have an actor like Mark Hamill, a guy who is largely known for creating a character who is the archetypal good guy, heart of gold, wants to defeat evil. You can't say anything bad about him, but then you switch the channel and you get to see Batman punching a killer clown voiced by a Jedi Knight. I mean,
well, didn't he, when he originally did the show, he did some voice for some extra character? Which one? There was one guy on the show that gets basically the lead role on the show. Was it Mark Hamill or is it Batman?
You're talking about Mark Hamill. The story about Hamill's getting the role as the Joker is actually kind of interesting. He was living in Hollywood at the time, and he was looking for work. He was working in a couple off-Broadway plays.
Yeah, that's right. He wasn't actually a voice actor.
Yeah, he was just looking for work, and his agent had said, I've
got this other job for you.
I've got this other job for you. That they're looking for somebody to do some readings, and they brought him in to play a bit part, one of the villains in one of the episodes I showed you called Heart of Ice.
Yes.
Which reinvented the history and backstory of Mr. Freeze to make him more of almost a Shakespearean villain in terms of his scope and the tragedy and the humanity of his loss.
It's a character that's not really well defined besides, like a lot of, we didn't want to talk about, but comic books, a lot of the villains don't have crazy backstories all the time, particularly in the Batman series. A lot of what people consider the backstory came from this show.
Exactly, yeah.
It was created out of nothing, the shooting for the moon. We're just going to make an actual backstory as opposed to them just being a very flat, static character.
Yeah, and it was so impactful that the Heart of Ice actually won a Daytime Emmy for Best Televised Short. So Hamill comes in and he's reading a line for, he's reading for the role of the villain of the story, a gentleman who is responsible for the accident that forces Mr. Freeze to isolate his wife and keep her basically in suspended animation, and pushes him into the freeze suit. And he said, well, I'm done with this character. Do you guys have anything else I can read for? And they said, well, we're still looking for, we've got the Joker, but we're still kind of open for roles. And he said, oh, I'd love to do the Joker. Let me do the Joker. And he comes in and he tries it, and it's so phenomenal that he becomes the de facto voice actor, and in one of those weird twists of fate, the guy who he replaced was Tim Curry.
Oh.
Yeah, that Tim Curry.
Yes, that Tim Curry. Like, I almost would have liked to have seen what Curry would have done with the role, because if you want to talk about a character who would have scared the heck out of some little kids.
Yeah, make him run out of the movie theater.
Yeah, oh man. But you know, a Batman in terms of a series, the thing that always draws me to it is it's the first TV show that I can remember that was willing to engage with me on a mature level. And I don't mean that its subject material was dark and gritty and was challenging. It was the fact that it had all those themes, but it was willing to trust its young audience to grapple with maybe some issues or some themes.
There's
that were
serious topics in that show.
Yeah, and they were willing to let the kids, to put it out there for a childhood audience. Not only that, but it was also made with the intention that it appealed to the older audience as well, which honestly was something of a rarity for cartoons in general in those days.
And the show's violent too, compared to other cartoons, like actual violence.
Yeah.
Like there's guns pulled on people. People are getting hurt. In fact, I think Gordon actually gets shot in at least 1 or 2 episodes.
Yeah, I mean, people get blown up. I mean, the Joker is blown up multiple times. Like they all but show the scene where Harvey Dent, half of his face gets blown off in a chemical explosion. And it's the fact that when Batman runs over to him and he turns him over, and all you see is his reaction. And that the fact that they don't show it makes it all the more horrifying. And that's what really sticks with you for those films, for that show. But Batman was so hugely influential that I would argue that it's almost kind of a precursor to what we have now in terms of animation.
I think the impact, as far as, and I might be stretching, but as far as the impact is, if you look at shows like Adventure Time, Steven Universe, for instance, you look at regular show. There's even like Space Ghost, Coast to Coast, and other stupid things that were happening. When I say stupid things, I mean there's a lot of surrealistic comedy and things going on in those shows. I think the people with the money, because at any point, Batman the Animated Series, they could have pulled the money and said, you're done. That's it. But for all the different reasons, by the fact that, I think it did reasonably well. I don't think it got, how many episodes are there? There's like 8 seasons of it?
There's 4 seasons. It went on for...
I'm thinking of,
I think there's probably like 60 or 70 episodes of the series.
So it ran like 4 years.
Yeah. So and that was...
Yeah.
And like the first season has something like 43 episodes to its credit.
Right,
It's huge and it's long and it's huge. It defines this hugely expansive world, and it's kind of interesting to see how cartoons have, especially the ones we remember fondly from the '90s. Like for example, we talked about Batman, but the other one that I always hear mentioned is Gargoyles.
Gargoyles. Yeah. That is an amazing. When you think of the voice talent, again, they didn't pull the money out before they had enough episodes for people to remember what it was.
I mean, you want to talk about bringing in some heavy hitters. I mean, you had Keith David,
Brent Spiner.
Yeah, Brent Spiner. We could basically just say you had Keith David, and then half the cast of Star Trek: The Next Generation was brought in to voice most of the characters for that show. But they're all classically Shakespearean, theatrically trained actors.
That to me is a huge deal.
Yeah.
I mean, if you look at, I don't want to get away from cartoons too much, but just their background being that, you look at Star Trek: The Next Generation compared to other television, a lot I don't know how much cartoon, I don't want to get too sidetracked, but cartoons, this will be for next panel. I'll save that one. It just basically has to do with, like, courtroom dramas became a thing after A Few Good Men and all that. So a lot of television shows became, even if they're sci-fi, like Deep Space Nine became courtroom dramas. So I found that interesting. But anyway, the voice acting talent and them being classically trained is a really big deal. And I think the early 90s, there's so many amazing voice actors that ended up getting work all over the place. Like a very famous PC game, Baldur's Gate. Pinky and the Brain, the Animaniacs.
Oh, God.
Basically, and then they get an orchestra to do it. Like, there's a lot of effort put into the artwork, and the money gives them the leash to do it without pulling the rug out from under them. Like, okay, the marketing, we don't have to worry about the marketing because the show we know is going to carry, and, there's residual royalties and things that are going to happen with that.
Yeah. I mean, you want to talk about...
If Batman failed,
yeah.
I think that it would be a lot different. We probably wouldn't be talking here.
Or we might be talking about it, but definitely not in the context
Much different,
of
like
of now, where we're kind of living through another, almost I would say another cartoon golden age, where we've seen shows not only age gracefully in a lot of in a large sense, stuff like Gargoyles and Batman and Animaniacs in particular, but now we see cartoon shows, because the way the media has changed. Stream, not to beat the Netflix drum too much, but the ability to stream anything everywhere not only changes how we perceive cartoons as a medium, but how they're produced. Because as we, if you want to look at something like, say, Voltron, or Korra, or Gravity Falls, or something like Steven Universe, or My Little Pony, or Star vs. the Forces of Evil. You have all these shows that start off, that might start off as comedies or start off as kind of their own thing, but we expect them to have consistently developing characters who grow and learn and change and mature with us. And we also expect them to have consistent themes and a consistent story. Honestly, before the early 2000s, I can't really remember a TV show other than a couple here and there that actually were paced and written in a way that was meant to be episodic, thematic television.
Yeah.
There's like the only.
They're all Seinfeld. They all come. A lot of all those other cartoons, they go back. Even Animaniacs goes essentially back to where they started every episode.
Yeah.
But a lot of shows now, like regular shows, one I watched all the time, the characters grew up and had different. Like there's a story, and I want to say that there's an anime influence because there's a moving story.
Yeah.
That's a really good point. Wow, I wasn't that. Wow.
I mean, and it all changes the way because we can binge it all. And because we don't have to wait,
I think that's I'm seeing,
sorry. Because we don't have to wait week to week to week. I mean, that's, if we want to go all the way back to Toonami, one of the things that made it so successful was the fact that they knew how to pace out the series so that, for example, the one I always go to is something like a show like Yu Yu Hakusho. They knew how to take that show and space it out in such a way that as you were going to hit like a climactic battle to end the saga, it would always hit the episode right before where they were about to have the final battle would always be on a Friday. So you'd have to wait Saturday and Sunday and then come back on Monday to see how things resolve themselves, and then you could spend the whole rest of Tuesday through Friday gearing up for the next arc, and it would kind of recycle itself. Now, because we can basically sit back and say, I'm going to binge the entirety of Gravity Falls in a weekend, that's going to change how you interact with it because you're not forced to sit down and take it piece by piece by piece and sit there and really contemplate it and kind of sit with it and think about little details. You're just kind of rushing through the whole thing and taking it all in one. You might be losing some of the nuance, but the ability to take it all in at once allows you to almost instantaneously discuss it with people and go on message boards and Twitter, and a cartoon can become, in a sense, a worldwide cultural phenomenon. Like, let's say, My Little Pony. And that's obviously the one that a lot of people are going to go back to because it started off as a show that was made. It's a little girl show. How could they possibly make something good from ponies? And my friend, I can distinctly remember when one of my best friends sent me an episode of My Little Pony. He said, "Here, watch this whole thing. Don't click away from it until you watch the whole thing." And it was episode 9 of season 1. And it's the one about the Parasprites. And when I first clicked on it and looked at it, I sat there and I laughed myself silly for the first 5 minutes because I could not believe he was trying to get me to watch this stupid little show about a bunch of cartoon pastel horses.
You get John Delancey to be cute. Well, not cute, he picked this corner.
Yeah.
I mean, you just think of the classically trained, you get the right people behind to voice it, and the right writers, you can make something absolutely amazing. That show is amazing, and I had the same experience. It was like, I was told, don't watch episode 1, start with episode 2, and go from there, and this is amazing. And I love the episodes with John Delancey as a voice actor.
See, for me, it was kind of the opposite effect where my friend sent me one episode, and I said, well, that was pretty good, but I want to go back to the beginning and see where this thing starts, because the two-part pilot is where they kind of suck you in and establish the characters. You don't really get to know all their quirks until they get further into the season, but that show as a whole really changed the way people kind of defined television and approached programming in a way that it was meant for an inclusive audience. And it opened up conversations about, well, this is a girls' show, but a huge vocal majority of the fans are older adult males who are buying up our merchandise in droves and are a huge portion of our sales. And I can't help thinking that maybe it was that show that helped, kind of pave the way for something like Steven Universe, where now, because something like Ponies was so successful and we proved it's okay for boys to like a girls show, maybe Rebecca Sugar came on and said, I'd like to make a show that's not made for any demographic, it's made for everybody.
Yeah. It's a really interesting dynamic because if you look at big video game studios in the late 80s and early 90s, there's a lot of female head directors, writers, creative people running the first one you think of is Roberta Williams, King's Quest series. There's all these epic games that are essentially genderless. Video games used to be genderless and then they became gendered. And video games sort of were this, I could be completely wrong and off base, but there was a point in the world when you'd go to the toy aisle and it wasn't gendered. And then somewhere in the 80s, when all this marketing crap started to happen, you get blue is for boys and pink is for girls. So Nintendo at one point had to decide, well, we're not going to sell them electronics and Radio Shacks because we need to be in your Target, any of your big box stores or whatever to sell the product. So we have to pick an aisle to be in. So they pick boys, and that's why all the marketing, the heavy marketing that we all know from video games, Sega and all these other things, it's marketed towards boys and not girls. You look at the 70s and 80s, a lot of video game consoles and television, I want to say ColecoVision, I think Atari might have been a little bit gendered, but they would sell Radio Shack and stuff and family computers, the family system. And so things change, and I want to say cartoons reached a point where we're kind of a lot of adults are watching cartoons and all this conversation. We're having a conversation with mostly adults and some children about cartoons, and we could appreciate something that an art form where we can kind of mold and talk about stories where when it's not a sitcom, we can talk about and display a story in a way. I want to get into the Steven Universe thing. Okay. Because the stuff in there, I think, is really, really pertinent to... Go ahead. Yeah. Set up for Steven Universe.
For today's topic, one of the last things I do want to hit is Steven Universe because despite the fact that I don't follow the show as closely as some other people do, I think one of its faults is a very, very inconsistent release schedule. It makes it very hard to follow. That's one of the reasons why a lot of people have switched from watching their cartoons on television to watching them online or waiting for the entire season to release so that then you can actually just sit down and watch the show at your leisure, which again goes back to streaming. But Steven Universe for me was kind of an eye-opener because one of the episodes I sent you as kind of a refresher for this was it Alone Together?
Alone Together, yes. What an amazing episode of that show.
Is the first time I can ever remember a cartoon approaching the topic of gender identification and sexuality and personal exploration of
growing up, TLDR.
Of the sense of self.
Yes.
Yeah, and not only that, but in a way that is child-friendly. And it normalizes things that we would not have been able, or most networks, most shows would not have been allowed.
20 years ago, it wouldn't even have made it. The editing room floor is too close. It would have never made it out of someone's head. They would have been fired.
Or they would have written it down, and somebody in a meeting would have said, "No, throw that away. We're not even not."
Where are the toilet jokes?
Yeah,
where's the marketing stuff? Nope.
I mean, so it's one of those shows that, while I don't watch it a whole lot, I have a huge, tremendous respect for what it does and what it's trying to do as a show, because it's normalizing things that should be normalized, and by getting to kids at an early age, it's kind of taking what Ronald Reagan, with the conservative parents of America feared would happen with toy companies having access to certain blocks of children's programming and using that access to its advantage. Because, say you're a young child who is starting to experience some feelings of body dysmorphia. You don't really know where you belong, you don't know how to identify, and you don't really have a venue to talk to anybody about this, because especially if you live in a deeply conservative town that is very straight-laced, does not want anything out of line, doesn't entertain any kind of deviancy in any way. But then along comes a show like Steven Universe, which, because it's on Cartoon Network and because it's a show about dumb people from space who change forms and turn into these wild animals.
I mean, the show is cool in the sense of the way they have it set up. You can essentially approach any kind of topic or do something in an episode.
I mean, when I say dumb, I mean from an outsider's perspective. If you have an adult that's watching the show,
The premise is a little bit, okay, it's a little bit silly. Sure.
That's what they get. Well, that's what they do. They sneak it in.
They
They're like, we can talk about gender diversity because it's there. It's there if you want to find it, but it's not so blatant that there's room for.
Right, if that's not necessarily for you, or if it doesn't ring for you like that, the episode's still just cute. It's just a story between two people, kind of. Basically, the premise is that they get conjoined through dance.
Yeah.
And it's a really cute. If you haven't seen it, it's a really, really cute episode. Like, the trans word is never mentioned or anything. It's just cute. So if it's something you're struggling with that hits you, it's also just a good episode of a cartoon show. It has the amount of social commentary that's in it. At the same time, it's also just a kids' television show, and that's all it is. Yep.
And then at the same time, it can also be something incredibly fun and very stupid, with something like one of my favorite episodes, Tiger Millionaire. And I was talking with Iggy.
Has anyone seen Tiger Millionaire? Does anyone knows?
Yeah.
Yes.
As he was watching it, because there's a scene where Steven becomes basically a wrestling heel.
Yes. If you know WWF, there's basically there's baby faces. They're also known as faces. They're the good guys. Wrestling's very simple. There's good guys and bad guys. Bad guys are called heels. They're the ones that make the audience boo at you.
Yeah.
Tiger Millionaire. Go for it.
So Steven is very annoyed that the Gems won't let him kind of go off and do his own thing. And Amethyst, kind of the rowdy tomboy of the group, is
secretly doing wrestling shows off on the side.
And as a big, muscular, Attitude Era, 1980s.
Yes, this is the 90s,
hair.
back when you're allowed to swear in wrestling and do things that are quite inciting.
Yeah, and have the most insane backstory you want. And she's doing basically she's participating in this backyard wrestling league. And Steven finds out. He finds out and says, I want to do this too. And he comes up with a character called Tiger Millionaire, which is such a great name. And one of the best scenes in the entire episode is once he starts getting into his character, he basically plays him like a stuck-up rich boy billionaire.
Stuck-up capitalist billionaire.
Yeah.
Yes. He's got a briefcase with a dollar sign on it, and I think he's got like a gold chain, and totally hamming the entire thing up.
Yeah. And one of the best moments that I've ever experienced with Iggy was listening to him watch the show, and there's a point where Steven comes in and he's bought all the soda.
He buys all the stuff from the merchant
all
stand.
The soda in the merchant
Comes
stand.
in with it. He's walking down the aisle with it,
and the announcer says something to the effect of, "Oh man, it's a real scorcher. Good thing we have all that soda available at the
Tiger
concession
Millionaire
stand."
bought all the soda at the concession stand.
It's all for himself.
He's gonna
Oh, and he's dropped it on the floor, and now he's stepping in it.
He's
no
he's giving
soda
it to
for
the
anybody.
fans. Yep, he's stomping in it, and the fans are all annoyed that he bought all of the concession stand.
And Iggy, I could hear him laughing his ass off because he bought all the soda.
He bought all the soda and is rubbing it in their faces.
And then immediately after that comes one of my favorite line reads from the episode ever, where he gets too much into his character, and Lars, who's kind of this 90s slacker attitude millennial kid who doesn't care about anything, gets really invested in Tiger Millionaire, and he runs up and he says, "Tiger Millionaire, that was awesome. Can I have your autograph?" And Steven turns around and smacks the cup out of his hand and screams, "You couldn't afford it!" But it's that kind of silliness that allows the show to tap into stuff that, some kids, you can understand the basics of wrestling, but if you know some of the old Attitude Era stuff, like Iggy and I know a little bit of it. You probably know way more about it.
I know way too much.
Yeah, you know as much as Andrew does. I'm only just starting to dip my toes into the wrestling thing, but there's enough tropes in there that I can recognize and go,
it's
"Woo!"
so well done. And that's the thing about the newer shows is that when they take nostalgia, they don't just copy the nostalgia. There's a next level to it. It's wrestling from the 90s. It's like an improv thing. Wrestling from the 90s. Tiger Millionaire?
They don't only use it, there's a reverence for it that did not exist even 10 years ago.
Nostalgia is a really big thing,
And when a show tries to use intellectual property that you personally have a strong emotional response to, and they know that, when they come at it from a place of genuine reverence and wanting to not only make a joke, but make it so that you can get it too, because they're just as big a fan, or while also making it just as accessible for people who've never seen that thing before, that's when you know a show, or any kind of media in general, is something to watch and something to keep your eyes on.
I think we're about time here. We're a little bit over.
Yeah, we're a little bit over.
Is there something in here?
Yeah, there's nothing in here till 8, so if you guys had anything you wanted to talk about...
I have to leave in a minute, but I do want to hear one thing before everyone leaves. We didn't do this. In basically one sentence, I want to know, we're going to go through the room if you want to respond. What's your favorite cartoon and why? We talked about all kinds of cartoons. So we'll start with you. What's your favorite cartoon in just like one sentence or just a few words? Why?
I like so many, so if you have
Just pick one. If you had to pick only one, I know it's hard.
Rescue Rangers.
Rescue Rangers, love that show.
That's awesome. That's
Any particular reason why?
I like the champions.
It's horrible. I used to have the sticker books. What's yours? You can't. There's too many. But you're big cartoon fan. All right. It's hard to pick.
It really is.
It is
extremely hard. If I thought about it before, I'd be able to tell you, but I never really thought about what my favorite is.
All right.
Yeah, that's
fine. We'll go next. What's yours? Yeah.
Okay. Sonic SatAM. I love the dark adult theme.
Oh man.
There you go. What's yours? Yours. Still got one? That's fine. What's yours?
Well, right now, tie between Gravity Falls and Steven Universe.
Oh, that's a good place to be.
Is there a particular reason why?
Just
because that's what's hip now. I don't know.
Just, I really love the characters and the storyline, and Gravity Falls has like a really good mystery.
Yeah.
Yes.
And the art is
We
awesome.
didn't tell the story. Was it Rebecca? What's her name?
Rebecca Sugar.
Rebecca Sugar. She left Adventure Time to make Steven Universe.
Yeah.
And you can see the creativity and what that's why I said the setup of why they can do so much in the show is because of her direction. Oh, what's yours?
I like Rescue Rangers because I like Gadget Acrobat a lot.
A-Chat? What's yours? Favorite cartoon and just quick word why?
Bronco's Modern Life, especially going back to it after growing up watching it and realizing all the stuff that probably went over my head because of how
there's so much we didn't
how
get
much
into.
they pushed or it seemed like at some point they were just like, oh, we haven't caught us on yet, let's just go for it.
Well, can we? Yes, exactly. We'll get by the censors. That's what we were talking about. But even like Sesame Street, you look back as an adult if you're watching a kid. There's things that are done for the adults, and it's really, really smart. What's yours, Yellow Shirt?
Mine, I got a tie between Dexter's Laboratory and Get Ed.
Dexter's Laboratory and
Get Ed.
Get Ed.
Yes.
I've never heard of that.
I haven't heard of that one.
It's kind of hard to find anymore.
Get Ed. I'll have to look that up. Is there a particular reason why? Just that you grew up with her?
Technology, really. I like the idea of technology.
Oh wait, no, I've heard of that one. I've seen commercials for it, but I've never actually sat down to watch it.
Check it out.
Is it one of those shows on Disney XD?
Yes.
That's okay. That's
Okay.
because I didn't have the. All right. What's yours? Do you have one? Yours. Roadrunner.
Oh,
Classic.
Classic.
yeah.
Any particular reason why, or Roadrunner and Wile E. Coyote? Particular reason? Any reason that's your big favorite?
Well, I actually found it on YouTube. It's where the one that makes the Fall Guy. It is where the road runner gets caught by the road.
Ah!
He actually gets him.
Yep. And what's yours?
His favorite would he liked Roof the Buildings.
Oh, okay. All right. What's yours?
If I had to pick one for me, I'm gonna go kind of obscure on this. I will always rep Courage the Cowardly Dog because
Really underrated show. Wow.
Yeah, supremely underrated, and it's a show that I think approaches horror and life in general in a way that so few shows do. Because the thing that makes Courage courageous is not that he's scared all the time. It's the fact that even though he is scared or he is unsure or insecure, he's still there to face whatever life throws his way. And that's something I think we could all...
There's a roundness to the Courage character in that. Mine would have to be Animaniacs. Love that show to death. There's so many wonderful things that are done in that show that's partly edutainment, partly for entertainment. When you look back, what they got by the censors is absolutely astounding.
Oh, God, yeah.
But it kind of brings it all together. The kind of stuff that we're basically into is stuff that, I mean, even if you go way back to Roadrunner and all this other stuff, it's between the animation, between the voice talent, between the people with the money that let them have the free reign to essentially do what they want. Those are a lot of the shows that we remember, and I think that anything else you want to add? I think we're good.
I think we are too. I want to thank you, Iggy, for coming here. I know
Not a problem.
Yeah.
Sorry, I apologize. I was late. We're all this because of charity. Who is like everything is running slightly.
Trust me, I know. So we've been talking about doing something like this for at least a panel together for about a year.
Do it. Yeah.
Hopefully we can do this again next year. I mean, Animaniacs.
We can go on and on and on and on. I mean, we
can make
tried to cover as much as we could.
We can
Thank
make
you
a
very
whole
much.
panel out of Animaniacs. I want to thank you guys all for coming, and
that's
we'll
Ernor.
enjoy the rest of the con. I'm Ernor. This is Iggy. Thank you guys.
Thank you.
All right.
Have a good one, everybody. I have to go apparently eat cupcakes for charity now.
Silver Gato Man, he bought me a coffee. Silver Gato Man, here is the song for thee. He likes to video all the panels at the cons. You should go and watch them whether they are short or long. Silver Gato Man, you video that's not a jibe. All of you go to his YouTube channel and like and subscribe.